What if I told you that 3 simple days of speaking to yourself differently could begin to change everything? That the words you whisper silently, those no one hears but you, hold the power to reshape your life? This is not about motivation. It's not about quick fixes. It's about something deeper, a story, a quiet monk in a golden robe who walks through riverside villages, mountain temples, and dusty paths, not to teach, but to awaken, not through sermons, but through silence, presence, and questions that pierce the soul. Why do we speak so harshly to ourselves? Why do we offer kindness to strangers and cruelty to our own hearts? In the next few moments, you will enter a journey of conflict, healing, and revelation. You will see how a musician lost her inner rhythm, how a fisherman learned to forgive his body, and how a single sentence, spoken at the right time, can echo for a lifetime. Stay, listen closely, because by the end of this story, a new voice may rise within you, one that's been waiting, one that already knows the way home. Are you ready? Let's begin. Part 1. The whisper that begins it all. It began not with thunder, but with silence. Just before the villagers stirred slowly, fires were rekindled, tea leaves unfurled in steaming kettles. But at the edge of this quiet world, alone and unnoticed, a young woman named Aiko sat at the bank of the Katsura River. Her eyes glassy with a weariness that no sleep could touch. Her clothes were simple, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. Around her, nature whispered the calm of morning. But inside her, a storm raged. Aiko had lived in the village her whole life. But there had been a loss, a tragedy. No one spoke of it anymore, but it lingered in every sideways glance, every hushed voice, every empty seat at family gatherings. And though the village had moved on, Aiko had not. She had built a prison of guilt, regret, and shame so intricately designed that no one could see its bars but her. She hadn't come to the river looking for answers. She came here every morning because the silence But that morning, something different awaited her. Across the water, just beyond a cluster of moss-covered stones, sat a man robed in gold. His posture was upright, effortless. A string of wooden prayer beads hung from his hand like a cascade of stillness. The monk was facing the sun, eyes closed, lips moving with the breath of some silent chant. Aiko stared, not out of curiosity but because something about his presence pressed against her grief like the first warm light after winter. She should have turned back, but she didn't. She stepped into the shallows and crossed the river barefoot, the cold water awakening a forgotten pulse in her limbs. When she reached him, she stood quietly. The monk did not open his eyes. His voice was calm, as if he had been waiting for her all along. "Sit," he said. There was no demand in it, only invitation. Aiko lowered herself to the ground, unsure why her heart beat faster, unsure why her throat felt tight. "Do you know the first lie we believe when we suffer?" the monk asked. Still not looking at her, she shook her head, not realizing he couldn't see her. "We believe it will never end." She opened her mouth to reply, but nothing came out. "We say to ourselves, I will always feel this way." And he opened his eyes, deep and weathered like mountain stone, and looked directly into her. "What you repeat in silence becomes the voice of your life." Aiko looked down at her hands, now resting in her lap. "Then how'd I change the voice?" 3 days, the monk said, holding up 3 fingers. "For 3 days, say only this to yourself, especially when the darkness rises. This is pain, but I am not pain. This is sorrow, but I am not sorrow. I am the sky, not the storm." Say it, even when it feels like a lie. She didn't speak, but she nodded. Kaito, the monk, as she would later learn, reached into the fold of his robe and handed her a single river stone. On it, carved in soft calligraphy, was the character for mu, emptiness, or more accurately, the space before form. "Carry this. When you feel lost, hold it. It will remind you there is space beyond the storm." That night, Aiko placed the stone beside her sleeping mat. She didn't sleep well, But for the first time in a long time, she didn't wake in tears. The next morning, she returned to the river. Kaito was not there. She sat anyway. She repeated the words. She repeated them again. She repeated them with clenched fists and closed eyes. She repeated them through tears. By the third day, something unexpected happened. The words didn't just feel like armor, they felt like truth. The pain was still there, but it no longer defined her. She returned to the banyan grove beyond the temple, where she had found Kaito once. And again, there he sat. "I didn't think you would come back," she said. "I didn't think you would listen," he replied. Aiko smiled, faint but genuine. "I'm still in pain, but now, I'm also awake." Kaito nodded, and together they sat, facing the river as dusk bled into twilight. No more needed to be said. But the whisper that had begun her journey was not hers alone. In the stillness of a distant village, a young man bent over a broken instrument was about to hear the same voice inside him stir for the first time in years. The wind carried the beginning of his story, and the monk, Kaito, was already on the path that would lead him there. Part 2. The Monk and the Musician. Theo had not heard silence in a long time. His days in the city had been a clamor of engines, urgent voices, subway brakes, and the constant flickering hum of digital life. The noise had become a background to his despair, something he stopped noticing until it vanished. When he arrived in the village of Hoshida, it wasn't for peace, it was to disappear. His friends had stopped calling months ago. His last performance had ended with him walking off stage mid-song. The music gone from his hands. His breath, his soul. He had tried to explain it, first to his manager, then to his bandmates, and finally to himself, but none of the explanations felt real. How could he articulate the experience of something beautiful simply leaving? Music had once flowed through him as effortlessly as wind through trees. Now, every note he played felt like a lie. So he packed a small bag, left a note, and caught a train into the mountains. The village where he settled was barely marked on maps. It had no cell reception, no internet, no expectations. It welcomed him with silence, not cold, not warm, but simply present. That, in itself, was a relief. For the first few days, Theo walked. He wandered dirt roads between rice paddies, rested under the eaves of old temples, and watched the mist curl up through cedar groves in the early morning. He didn't bring his guitar. He didn't bring any books. He didn't even bring himself. Not really, just the shell of him. And then, one morning, he heard it. Not music, not a melody, but the voice of someone speaking without words. He had come to the edge of a bamboo forest, following a small trail that wrapped around a hillside. There, beside a still pool beneath the shade of leaning willows, sat a monk in golden robes. Kaito. The man's presence was like a bell that rang without sound, something Theo could feel deep in his chest. He didn't speak, he didn't invite, he simply sat, as steady as the stones that lined the water's edge. Theo sat too. They didn't speak that day, or the next, but on the third day, Kaito finally turned to him and said, "When was the last time you listened to a sound without needing it to mean anything?" Theo blinked, unsure if the question was rhetorical. I don't know," he said truthfully. Kaito nodded. "Then we begin there." They began not with songs or prayers, but with silence. Each morning, they would sit in the forest at the same pool. Birds would call, wind would rustle, insects would hum their quiet rhythm. At first, Theo tried to capture them in his mind, to organize them into patterns, beats, structures, but slowly, he stopped thinking. He simply heard. And then one evening, as the sun draped the trees in molten gold, Kaito handed Theo a single branch from a maple tree, its crimson leaves fluttering. "Do you see this leaf?" Kaito asked. "Yes. Is it part of the tree?" Theo hesitated. "Yes, and no. It's both." Kaito smiled. "So are you with your music?" That night, Theo returned to his small rented room and opened the case that had lain beneath his bed since his arrival. His guitar was still there. A bit dusty but whole. He didn't play it. He just held it. It felt like returning to something he had thought lost in a dream. The next morning, Kaito was waiting by the river. "You are afraid to fail," the monk said, not as accusation, but as truth. Theo nodded. "What if I pick it up and it's still gone? Then you keep listening, and when you stop listening for music, it might return as sound. And then, one day, as breath." And that was how the practice began. Theo would walk each morning to the edge of the forest, find the same old tree stump by the riverbank, and sit. He would strum, not songs, not scales, not rehearsals, just tones, vibration, sound. Some days, it was hollow. Other days, something stirred. He noticed the sound of the wind again, the deep rumble of a distant thundercloud, the trickle of a stream against worn stones. And in those sounds, he noticed something else, his breath sinking, his chest loosening, his fingers softening. The monk never told him what to play. But one morning, without thinking, Theo closed his eyes and began to sing. It wasn't a song he had written. It wasn't a song he had learned. It was simply a string of tones that rose and fell like a lullaby spoken by the river. When he opened his eyes, Kaito was smiling. "The music didn't leave you," he said. "You left yourself." In the days that followed, Theo found himself humming without fear, tapping rhythms into the earth with his heel, and playing small melodies for the children in the village who followed him with bright eyes and open hearts. He no longer thought of stages, or reviews, or critics. He thought of breath. He thought of wind. He thought of moments. And each time he played, he said to himself, "This is sound, but I am not sound. This is silence, but I am not silence. I am the sky, not the storm." It had begun with a whisper, 3 days, one mantra, and the presence of a monk who asked for nothing and gave everything. But as the last leaf of autumn drifted to the earth, another soul far beyond the mountain path awoke in the stillness of her own sorrow, unaware that the monk's journey would soon lead him to her door. Part 3. You don't need permission to shine. The storm came at midnight. Winds howled like ghosts across the ancient tiles of the monastery roof. Trees bent under the weight of rain. Lightning flickered like a restless heartbeat across the sky. But within the stone walls of the prayer hall, there was only stillness. A single candle burned on the altar, casting a gentle glow across the worn face of the monk, who sat in silence, his hands gently wrapped around his prayer beads. Ethan sat across from him, wrapped in a wool blanket, staring at the flickering flame. His face was tight with emotion, his eyes tired from a restless day. He had come to the temple seeking peace, but instead, he found something more disorienting, himself. "I feel like I've been hiding my whole life," Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible above the rain. "Afraid to be too much. Afraid to be too bright. Afraid that if I shine, someone will try to put me out." The monk nodded slowly. "And so you dimmed yourself?" Ethan looked away. "I became what they needed me to be, not what I truly was. I lowered my voice. I held back my opinions. I buried my talents. I told myself it was humility, but now it feels like fear." The monk turned his gaze to the candle. Its flame, though small, danced confidently against the darkness. "Do you think the candle asks the night for permission to burn?" Ethan shook his head. "No," the monk continued. "It simply burns, because that is its nature." Silence hung between them. Then, the monk spoke again, slower this time. "There is a sacred truth many people never hear in their lifetime. You don't need permission to be who you are. You never did. You don't need the world to approve your light before you shine." The wind howled louder. Ethan listened. "In this world," the monk continued, "we are taught from a young age that being small is safe. That not drawing attention protects us from judgment. That we must wait until someone else tells us we are ready, or worthy, or good enough. And so we become skilled at waiting, for a promotion, for validation, for applause, for some mythical sign that says, Now you may live as yourself. But it never comes, Ethan murmured. No, the monk said. It does not, because the world will never hand you the key to your own freedom. It will offer you chains disguised as praise, and cages built from approval. He leaned closer now, his voice softer but stronger. You are not here to decorate someone else's expectations. You are here to blaze like the morning sun. A sudden crack of thunder echoed through the hall, as if the sky itself was affirming the monk's words. Ethan exhaled, a deep, aching breath. He had been waiting for permission his whole life, from teachers, from family, from bosses, from strangers, even from people who never asked for that role. But now, sitting in this quiet storm with an old monk and a burning candle, he realized something revolutionary. The permission he had been waiting for was already within him. The monk stood slowly and motioned for Ethan to follow. They stepped out into the storm, robes soaked instantly, but neither of them flinched. The rain was cold but cleansing, the wind loud, but honest. They walked silently to the cliffside at the edge of the monastery grounds. From there, the valley stretched out like a dream, dark, vast, and alive. The monk pointed to the horizon where the storm clouds parted just slightly and a single star glimmered in the sky. You see that star? He said. It shines whether you see it or not. It doesn't wait for you to look up. It simply shines because that is its truth. Ethan stood in awe, the rain washing away something heavy inside him. For the first time in years, he felt something flicker in his chest, not anxiety, not fear, but power, quiet, steady. His own light, long buried, was still there. The monk's words returned like a drumbeat. You don't need permission to shine. Too many of us shrink to fit into rooms never built for our souls. We water ourselves down so we won't offend. We hide our brilliance under layers of apology. But that is not humility. That is self-erasure. True humility is knowing your light and sharing it without arrogance or fear. The monk had lived this lesson himself. Long ago, in his own youth, he had studied under a master who spoke rarely but saw deeply. One day, as a novice, he had been afraid to share his ideas during a temple meeting. Afterward, the master pulled him aside and said only one sentence. To withhold your truth is not a kindness. It is a cowardice. Those words pierced the monk like an arrow. And over the years, he learned that the world does not need more silent saints. It needs awakened souls, courageous, flawed, glowing from the inside out. Souls who stop waiting to be chosen and begin choosing themselves. He shared this story with Ethan days later. As they walked through the village market, Ethan listened carefully, his eyes brighter now, his steps lighter. Don't confuse acceptance with alignment. The monk told him, just because others approve of your life doesn't mean it's the life meant for you. And just because others don't understand your path doesn't mean it isn't sacred. He gestured to a small bamboo flute at one of the stalls. You see that? He said. That flute does not try to be a drum. It sings its own note, and only in doing so can it contribute to the symphony of life. Ethan picked up the flute. He smiled. The monk smiled too, because he knew this was what it meant to return to the self. To stop performing and start expressing. To stop surviving and start living. And so Ethan began. He spoke up in places where he used to stay silent. He let his laughter echo when something delighted him. He pursued an old passion, painting, and hung his work in the village square. Even though his hands trembled at first, some didn't understand him, some even judged him, but others were inspired. Because light invites light. When you give yourself permission to shine, you give others permission to do the same. It creates a chain of courage. And the world needs more courage. More people choosing their own light over borrowed shadows. One evening, Ethan returned to the cliff where he had once stood in the storm. The sky was clear this time. Stars scattered like diamonds. He brought a lantern with him, but didn't light it. He sat in the dark. And still, he shone. Because he had learned that his light wasn't something outside of him. It was within. Always had been. As he sat there, the monk's words returned to him once more. You don't need permission to shine. You never did. You only needed to remember. And maybe, so do you. You who has been waiting for the world to approve of your dreams. You who hides your gifts so as not to outshine others. You who has mistaken playing small for playing safe. Part 4. The 3 sacred moments of the day. By the time Kaito arrived in the coastal village of Sugumi, the tides were already shifting. The waves came in gently that morning, brushing the shore as if afraid to wake what slept beneath the sand. The villagers were kind but quiet. Their eyes held a weariness that came not from toil, but from endurance. Life here was shaped by seasons, sea winds, and stories told in hushed tones. And among those stories, one name was spoken rarely, if at all. Yuna. She was 14, small for her age, thin, eyes like storm clouds. People said she had once been bright, full of laughter, until something happened, though no one seemed to know what. Her mother had grown ill and passed quickly. Her father, unable to hold the family together, drank and drifted into silence. Yuna was left with an aunt who loved her in theory but struggled in practice. The voices began not long after that. They came at night at first, then in mirrors, then while she walked. Voices that told her she was wrong, broken, too much, too little. At first, she whispered back, begged them to stop. Then, she started to believe them. She stopped going to school, stopped speaking. Her drawings turned from flowers and faces to empty boxes and scribbled words. She was a shell, but no one knew how to reach her. Until the monk arrived. He was not announced. He never was. He simply appeared one morning, walking along the shore in bare feet, holding a staff and humming to the wind. The villagers watched him warily at first, but he asked for nothing. He slept beneath the temple's outer eaves and swept the courtyard each morning. In the evenings, he would sit on a worn bench by the sea and speak to no one in particular. Yuna found him curious. She watched him from behind the gate, arms wrapped around herself like a fortress. He never looked directly at her, but somehow, she knew he saw her anyway. One morning, he spoke without turning. There are 3 sacred moments each day, he said. She froze. She had not spoken in weeks. Dawn, midday, dusk, he continued. At dawn, you meet yourself. At midday, you measure your truth. At dusk, you release what you no longer need. Yuna said nothing, but the next day, she returned. This time, he was sitting in meditation as the first light touched the horizon. Dawn, he whispered as if greeting an old friend. She sat on the stone steps, not beside him, but near enough to hear. He opened his eyes. What are you carrying? He asked gently. She shook her head. No answer. That's all right, he said. Sometimes the burden has no name, only weight. For the first time in months, she looked at someone without flinching. Over the next few days, she returned to the bench. At first, they sat in silence. Then she began to draw again, small sketches on temple offering paper. A wave, a tree, a candle. She left them where he sat. He never said a word, only tucked them carefully into his robe. At midday, Kaito would invite her to walk. They would say little, but he would point out small things. A spider spinning a web. The way a pebble clicked against the shore. The sun's heat on a blossom's petals. Slowly, she began to feel her senses again. The voices didn't disappear, but they grew quieter, like echoes instead of commands. Midday, he would say, is when the sun stands still, and so must we. Dusk came with salt winds and golden light. Each evening, they would light a lantern together and release it into the sea. No words, just flame and current. Let it carry something, he said. Grief, shame, a word you never spoke. Yuna never told him what she placed inside, but she watched the lanterns drift and disappear. And each time, something inside her softened. Weeks passed. One morning, as they watched the sun rise, she turned to him and whispered, "Why do the voices lie?" He looked at her for a long moment. Because they are born from wounds. not truth. She swallowed hard. How'd I stop them? You don't, he said. You outgrow them. She cried that day. Not loud, not long, but real. He didn't comfort her. He simply handed her a smooth stone, warm from the sun. Each time they speak, press this. Remember this light. Remember this silence. The next day, she stood alone at dawn and whispered, I am here. I am whole. I am enough. The monk left 2 days later. No goodbyes. Only a note tucked inside her last drawing. Your story will carry you. Dawn, midday, dusk. Let these moments be your compass. As he walked inland through the forest path, the trees seemed to part for him. He moved toward the mountains now, where a temple bell waited to ring again after decades of silence. But what waited at that temple was not just peace. It was a test. Part 5. When the mind fights the heart. The trail to the mountain temple curled like incense smoke, winding upward through mist-laced pines and steep stone steps worn smooth by centuries of bare feet. The mountain whispered with the hush of snowmelt streams and bird calls echoing from unseen branches. Into this silence walked Kaito, robes fluttering gently in the breeze. Prayer beads swinging with each step like a heartbeat marking the rhythm of the forest. He carried no map, no companion, no destination beyond the present moment. The temple revealed itself not suddenly, but gradually, as if the mountain chose when to unveil it. Its dark wooden beams were etched with age, its gate half sunken into ivy and moss. A single bronze bell, cracked but dignified, hung motionless under the weight of quiet years. Kaito stood at the entrance, his eyes lifting to the canopy above. A shaft of golden morning light pierced through the trees, resting on his shoulder as if in greeting. He entered with the reverence of one stepping into a memory. Ayumi had lived at this temple since she was 16. Now in her 30s, she moved through its courtyards with P. He did not speak at first. He simply joined her in the garden, kneeling beneath a red maple whose leaves rustled like whispered prayers. With sleeves rolled gently to his elbows, he began to rake the gravel, not with exactness, but with grace. The patterns he drew were not symmetrical. They fell. Ayumi watched. Her hands tightened on the shears she used for bonsai trimming. You're disturbing the lines, she finally said, not harshly, but firmly. Kaito looked up, his gaze steady and soft. Perhaps they were never meant to be permanent. A silence settled. The wind shifted. Later, they sat by the lotus pond, where dragonflies skimmed the surface like fleeting thoughts. Ayumi offered tea, her movements a choreography of tradition. As they sipped, Kaito looked at the reflection of the clouds in the water. Sometimes, he said, the mind builds temples the heart cannot enter. Ayumi didn't answer, but her posture stiffened. Her whole life had been a pursuit of discipline. She rose before dawn, bowed 108 times, chanted sutras with impeccable tone. Her teachers praised her for her order. Her peers admired her restraint. Yet lately, her meditations were hollow. Her breath felt like machinery. Her heart a silent guest locked behind the doors of perfection. Kaito began rising before her in the mornings. She would find him seated beneath the cedar tree outside the temple gate. Eyes closed, breath soft, the mist wrapped around him like a second robe. Animals were unafraid of him. Even the crows landed nearby without alarm. Each day, Ayumi watched him. He raked gravel, not in circles or lines, but in waves. He let petals fall into his tea and drank them with gratitude. He chanted not to be heard, but to feel the vibration in his chest. His presence was neither performative nor careless. It was full, human, alive. It disturbed her. One morning, as they sat in silence, she said, I came here to find peace through discipline. And have you found it? He asked gently. She hesitated. I found control. Kaito nodded. Control is a raft. It keeps us from drowning. But we are not meant to cling to it forever. She lowered her gaze. Her voice trembled. What if I let go and fall apart? Then you fall into your own arms. He said, the ones you've forgotten how to open. That night, She dreamt of walking barefoot through a field of wildflowers. No path, no map, only the sound of wind and he. Over the following days, she stopped measuring her breath. She chanted without trying to sound perfect. She began to paint again, something she hadn't done in years. Abstract colors, spirals, mountains, fire. One afternoon, she found Kaito standing at the edge of the temple cliff, watching the clouds roll over the valley like waves of thought. He turned and offered her a small, weathered scroll. It was a poem, written by a monk centuries ago. When the heart weeps, let the mind listen. When the mind resists, let the heart breathe. Together, they make the sky wide enough to hold the storm without fear. Ayumi read it 3 times. Then she wept, not from sadness, but from release. That evening, she joined Kaito in meditation under the maple tree. No bells, no chanting, only silence. In that stillness, something opened. Not a door, not a revelation, just space. And in that space, she remembered who she was before the teachings. And she loved that person. The next morning, Kaito was gone. Only a single blossom from the maple tree remained on her windowsill. Left without a note, she smiled, knowing that nothing needed to be said. Far across the valley, the monk walked again, toward a windswept plateau where an old man waited, burdened by bitterness and time, unaware that his life, too, was about to shift. Part 6. Speak to the body like a beloved friend. The sun cast a golden hue over the rolling hills as Kaito descended from the mountain temple. His journey led him to a tranquil village nestled by a serene lake, where the air was thick with the scent of blooming lotus flowers. Here, he encountered Haruki, a man whose life had been a tapestry of physical labor and silent suffering. Haruki was a fisherman, his body weathered by years of battling the elements, his hands calloused from casting nets, and his back hunched from hauling in the day's catch. Despite his physical ailments, he bore his pain with stoic silence, believing it a necessary burden of his trade. Kaito observed Haruki's daily routine, noting the grimace that accompanied each movement, the suppressed winces, and the subtle signs of discomfort. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of amber and rose, Kaito approached Haruki by the lakeside. "You carry your pain like an old friend," Kaito remarked gently. Haruki chuckled, a sound tinged with both amusement and resignation. "Pain is part of the job," he replied. Kaito nodded thoughtfully. "But does it have to be a constant companion?" Intrigued by the monk's perspective, Haruki agreed to join Kaito in a series of morning meditations by the lake. Each session began with simple breathing exercises, focusing on the rhythm of inhalation and exhalation, anchoring the mind in the present moment. Kaito guided Haruki to scan his body, acknowledging areas of tension and discomfort without judgment. As days turned into weeks, Haruki began to develop a newfound awareness of his body's signals. He learned to differentiate between the physical sensations of exertion and the emotional weight he had unconsciously attached to them. Through mindful observation, he discovered that his body was not merely a vessel of labor but a partner deserving of care and compassion. Kaito introduced Haruki to the practice of loving-kindness meditation, encouraging him to direct feelings of warmth and goodwill toward his own body. At first, Haruki found it challenging to extend such sentiments inward, but with persistent practice, he began to soften the harsh inner dialogue that had long dictated his relationship with his physical self. One morning, as the first light of dawn shimmered on the lake's surface, Haruki turned to Kaito with a serene smile. "For the first time, I feel at peace within my own skin," he confessed. Kaito smiled, his eyes reflecting the gentle ripples of the water. "When we treat our bodies with the same kindness we offer to others, we cultivate a harmony that resonates through every aspect of our being." As Kaito prepared to continue his journey, Haruki stood taller, his movements imbued with a newfound grace. The village by the lake had not changed, but within Haruki, a profound transformation had taken root, a testament to the healing power of mindful self-compassion. Part 7. The Language of Becoming. The sun cast a golden hue over the rolling hills as Kaito descended from the mountain temple. His journey led him to a tranquil village nestled by a serene lake, where the air was thick with the scent of blooming lotus flowers. Here, he encountered Haruki, a man whose life had been a tapestry of physical labor and silent suffering. Haruki was a fisherman, his body weathered by years of battling the elements, his hands calloused from casting nets, and his back hunched from hauling in the day's catch. Despite his physical ailments, he bore his pain with stoic silence, believing it a necessary burden of his trade. Kaito observed Haruki's daily routine, noting the grimace that accompanied each movement, the suppressed winces, and the subtle signs of discomfort. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of amber and rose, Kaito approached Haruki by the lakeside. "You carry your pain like an old friend," Kaito remarked gently. Haruki chuckled, a sound tinged with both amusement and resignation. "Pain is part of the job," he replied. Kaito nodded thoughtfully. "But does it have to be a constant companion?" Intrigued by the monk's perspective, Haruki agreed to join Kaito in a series of morning meditations by the lake. Each session began with simple breathing exercises, focusing on the rhythm of inhalation and exhalation, anchoring the mind in the present moment. Kaito guided Haruki to scan his body, acknowledging areas of tension and discomfort without judgment. As days turned into weeks, Haruki began to develop a newfound awareness of his body's signals. He learned to differentiate between the physical sensations of exertion and the emotional weight he had unconsciously attached to them. Through mindful observation, he discovered that his body was not merely a vessel of labor but a partner deserving of care and compassion. Kaito introduced Haruki to the practice of loving-kindness meditation, encouraging him to direct feelings of warmth and goodwill toward his own body. At first, Haruki found it challenging to extend such sentiments inward, but with persistent practice, he began to soften the harsh inner dialogue that had long dictated his relationship with his physical self. One morning, as the first light of dawn shimmered on the lake's surface, Haruki turned to Kaito with a serene smile. "For the first time, I feel at peace within my own skin," he confessed. Kaito smiled, his eyes reflecting the gentle ripples of the water. "When we treat our bodies with the same kindness we offer to others, we cultivate a harmony that resonates through every aspect of our being." As Kaito prepared to continue his journey, Haruki stood taller, his movements imbued with a newfound grace. The village by the lake had not changed, but within Haruki, a profound transformation had taken root, a testament to the healing power of mindful self-compassion. Part 8. The Monk and the Mirror. The sun cast a golden hue over the rolling hills as Kaito descended from the mountain temple. His journey led him to a tranquil village nestled by a serene lake, where the air was thick with the scent of blooming lotus flowers. Here, he encountered Haruki, a man whose life had been a tapestry of physical labor and silent suffering. Haruki was a fisherman, his body weathered by years of battling the elements, his hands calloused from casting nets, and his back hunched from hauling in the day's catch. Despite his physical ailments, he bore his pain with stoic silence, believing it a necessary burden of his trade. Kaito observed Haruki's daily routine, noting the grimace that accompanied each movement, the suppressed winces, and the subtle signs of discomfort. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of amber and rose, Kaito approached Haruki by the lakeside. "You carry your pain like an old friend," Kaito remarked gently. Haruki chuckled, a sound tinged with both amusement and resignation. "Pain is part of the job," he replied. Kaito nodded thoughtfully. "But does it have to be a constant companion?" Intrigued by the monk's perspective, Haruki agreed to join Kaito in a series of morning meditations by the lake. Each session began with simple breathing exercises, focusing on the rhythm of inhalation and exhalation, anchoring the mind in the present moment. Kaito guided Haruki to scan his body, acknowledging areas of tension and discomfort without judgment. As days turned into weeks, Haruki began to develop a newfound awareness of his body's signals. He learned to differentiate between the physical sensations of exertion and the emotional weight he had unconsciously attached to them. Through mindful observation, he discovered that his body was not merely a vessel of labor but a partner deserving of care and compassion. Kaito introduced Haruki to the practice of loving-kindness meditation, encouraging him to direct feelings of warmth and goodwill toward his own body. At first, Haruki found it challenging to extend such sentiments inward, but with persistent practice, he began to soften the harsh inner dialogue that had long dictated his relationship with his physical self. One morning, as the first light of dawn shimmered on the lake's surface, Haruki turned to Kaito with a serene smile. "For the first time, I feel at peace within my own skin," he confessed. Kaito smiled, his eyes reflecting the gentle ripples of the water. "When we treat our bodies with the same kindness we offer to others, we cultivate a harmony that resonates through every aspect of our being." As Kaito prepared to continue his journey, Haruki stood taller, his movements imbued with a newfound grace. The village by the lake had not changed, but within Haruki, a profound transformation had taken root, a testament to the healing power of mindful self-compassion. Part 9. A new self is listening. The sun cast a golden hue over the rolling hills as Kaito descended from the mountain temple. His journey led him to a tranquil village nestled by a serene lake, where the air was thick with the scent of blooming lotus flowers. Here, he encountered Haruki, a man whose life had been a tapestry of physical labor and silent suffering. Haruki was a fisherman, his body weathered by years of battling the elements, his hands calloused from casting nets, and his back hunched from hauling in the day's catch. Despite his physical ailments, he bore his pain with stoic silence, believing it a necessary burden of his trade. Kaito observed Haruki's daily routine, noting the grimace that accompanied each movement, the suppressed winces, and the subtle signs of discomfort. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of amber and rose, Kaito approached Haruki by the lakeside. "You carry your pain like an old friend," Kaito remarked gently. Haruki chuckled, a sound tinged with both amusement and resignation. "Pain is part of the job," he replied. Kaito nodded thoughtfully. "But does it have to be a constant companion?" Intrigued by the monk's perspective, Haruki agreed to join Kaito in a series of morning meditations by the lake. Each session began with simple breathing exercises, focusing on the rhythm of inhalation and exhalation, anchoring the mind in the present moment. Kaito guided Haruki to scan his body, acknowledging areas of tension and discomfort without judgment. As days turned into weeks, Haruki began to develop a newfound awareness of his body's signals. He learned to differentiate between the physical sensations of exertion and the emotional weight he had unconsciously attached to them. Through mindful observation, he discovered that his body was not merely a vessel of labor but a partner deserving of care and compassion. Kaito introduced Haruki to the practice of loving-kindness meditation, encouraging him to direct feelings of warmth and goodwill toward his own body. At first, Haruki found it challenging to extend such sentiments inward, but with persistent practice, he began to soften the harsh inner dialogue that had long dictated his relationship with his physical self. One morning, as the first light of dawn shimmered on the lake's surface, Haruki turned to Kaito with a serene smile. "For the first time, I feel at peace within my own skin," he confessed. Kaito smiled, his eyes reflecting the gentle ripples of the water. "When we treat our bodies with the same kindness we offer to others, we cultivate a harmony that resonates through every aspect of our being." As Kaito prepared to continue his journey, Haruki stood taller, his movements imbued with a newfound grace. The village by the lake had not changed, but within Haruki, a profound transformation had taken root, a testament to the healing power of mindful self-compassion. 10. Reflection and life lesson. Throughout this journey, we followed Kaito, the gentle monk in the golden robe. As he wandered through mountain paths, riversides, quiet temples, and simple villages, without seeking fame or recognition, he became a mirror for every soul he met. Ayumi, the disciplined but emotionally distant devotee. Haruki, the weary fisherman who had forgotten the tenderness his body deserved. And many others quietly yearning for peace but trapped within their own minds. Through each interaction, Kaito never imposed. He simply listened, offered insight, and held space for change. And slowly, like the sunrise over a misty valley, transformation occurred, not through force, but through deep presence, patience, and unconditional compassion. Kaito's story is not only about helping others, but about the quiet revolution of listening, deeply, without judgment, not just to others, but to ourselves. His path reminds us that healing begins when we stop resisting the truth within us. When we allow our minds and hearts to meet. When we treat our bodies with the same gentleness we'd offer a beloved friend. We invite something sacred into our lives. Life lesson. Inner peace isn't something we achieve by becoming someone else. It comes when we remember who we've always been beneath the noise. To apply this today, try sitting in silence for just 5 minutes and listen, not to your phone or your thoughts, but to your breath. Let it speak. That's where becoming begins. What about you? What part of Kaito's journey touched you most? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. If you found this meaningful, don't forget to subscribe. Your support gives us the strength to continue sharing these stories.